A History of Protected Lands in the United States. The United States has a long, rich history of park preservation, with a story that often highlights the importance of figures of the likes of Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir as pioneers for protected areas. Presidents since have continued to expand the areas that we choose to preserve and maintain as culturally, historically, and scientifically valuable aspects of society. Most recently, under the Obama and Clinton administrations, significant amounts of land have been added to the National Park Service as declared national monuments under the Antiquities Act. Opposition towards these expansions and a claimed federal overreach has led to significant restrictions, most significantly in Bears Ears, shown in the title slide, and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments in southeastern Utah. Because of these restrictions under the Trump administration, the fate of the Park Service and preservation in the United States appear to be dependent on impending legislation. The future of preservation will likely be determined by legislators, but perhaps we can find a favorable solution with an understanding of underlying patterns in GIS. An appreciation for natural and man-made beauty has existed for millennia. However, it was not until the 18th and 19th centuries that it rose to prominence throughout the Western world. With the harmful rapid spread of urbanization under the Industrial Revolution, people questioned the value of economic progress under the drudgery and grind of manufacturing communities, and thus followed poets and philosophers embracing nature. Andrew Jackson Downing, a horticulturist, and poet William Cullen Bryant first proposed the city park idea, and during the 1840s they called for the establishment of a large reserve within easy reach of New York City. Central Park was finally established in 1853 and would set a precedent for preservation in the common interest well before the national park idea. The national park would, however, shift the focus slightly from the city park concept. The origin of the national park idea and motives behind it have been disputed, but most commonly the idea is said to have originated in September 1870 during a discussion around a campfire near the Madison Junction in present-day Yellowstone Park. Members of the Washburn-Doane expedition encamped at Madison Junction on September 19, 1870, and as they recalled the spectacular sights they had witnessed on their excursion, they considered potential uses for this land and the profits that would be made in tourism. They rejected the idea of exploitation, and the explorers agreed that the geysers, waterfalls, and canyons of Yellowstone should be preserved as a public park. This proposal was relayed to political circles, and legislation was passed within a year and a half, establishing Yellowstone National Park. The Park Act initially attracted little attention in a time when the government was aggressively pursuing huge railroad land grants and homestead mining and timber acts. When Congress established Yellowstone on March 1, 1872, more than 2 million acres as the world's first national park in the northwest corner of present-day Wyoming were set to be preserved and managed by the federal government. Not long after, certain deviations from the initial national park idea became common. A significant one was Mesa Verde National Park, established in 1906 to preserve impressive archaeological sites. In June 1906, within just a few days of its establishment, Congress passed the Antiquities Act, allowing for the creation of national monuments which would be added to the national park system. Monuments would include important aspects of history and science and would be no larger than necessary to protect cultural or scientific values of concern. Political pressure to limit vandalism amongst national prehistoric treasures influenced the act, which authorized the president to establish monuments by proclamation like national forest reserves. During this time, under Theodore Roosevelt, the act brought the creation of numerous monuments, including the Devil's Tower in 1906 and the Grand Canyon in 1908. The Antiquities Act also made it illegal to take antiquities from federal lands and authorized a permit system allowing excavation of antiquities, but only for research purposes. 10 years later, in the spring of 1916, Congress studied a proposed National Parks Bureau, and Richard Watrous, before the House, explained that the United States was falling behind in protection, as Canada had established a National Parks Office 5 years earlier, and that they were producing an ever-increasing revenue from tourist traffic. Following 6 years of campaigning, Congress passed the bill establishing the National Park Service, and Woodrow Wilson signed it into law on August 25, 1916. From the beginning of FDR's presidency until the beginning of our involvement in World War II, the New Deal fostered vast expansion and diversification within the Park Service, now including the management of more historic and archaeological sites, which previously had no federal oversight. In June 1933, Roosevelt signed executive orders transferring numerous sites to the NPS, reorganizing preservation activity. The service had campaigned for and gained 44 historic sites along with 12 natural areas, including Saguaro National Monument. Most of the areas were battlefields and monuments in Washington, D.C., showing the service's first venture into urban management. 2 years later, in 1935, the Historic Sites Act authorized cooperation of federal and state governments in identifying and preserving these types of sites. However, as the United States became involved in World War II, things changed. The National Park Service during wartime was reduced to a protection and maintenance basis. Goals were simply to keep the parks intact and preventing a breakdown of the park's concept. The war also involved military rest camps being established in Grand Canyon and Sequoia National Parks and hospitals and rehab facilities in Yosemite. The end of the war brought an upswing in park visitors, and it was reported that in the first 3 months following victory, visits were up by 56.4%. Also, numbers jumped from 11.7 million to 25.5 million amongst national visitors from 1945 to 1947. With poorly maintained facilities, renovations were required, and Mission 66 was established as 2,700 miles of newer improved roads were constructed in an effort to support a goal of 80 million annual park visitors by 1966, the 50th anniversary of the NPS. Although it helped improve access to parks, Mission 66 encountered severe criticism as to many it tended to modernize and urbanize the parks. Dirt roads from earlier were paved, resulting in heavy tourist traffic, and the modernism in park architecture was jarring when compared to the log and stone rustic architecture of earlier structures. The new buildings, like the Shark Valley Observation Tower pictured below, suggested an urban America that most did not like in comparison to the park's symbolism earlier. During the times of park modernization in 1964, Congress passed the Wilderness Act, creating the National Wilderness Preservation System. The act protected 9.1 million acres immediately and reviewed 53 million acres over the next 10 years. The act enjoyed strong support from both parties, but still Democrats would take the lead on conservation and environmental issues in the years to come. Lyndon Johnson signed the act into law on September 3, 1964 in the Rose Garden, and he expressed his support as he explained that, quote, "Our concern is the total relation between man and the world around him." The Wilderness Act proclaims areas where, quote, "the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man" to be areas needing further protection. Hunting and fishing were important pastimes, and some saw the acts as a way to protect hunting grounds, and support from gun clubs and sporting groups was strong, unlike protection today. However, as today, the most persistent criticism was that it locked up public lands. Most presidents since 1906 have used the authority of the Antiquities Act to establish or expand monuments. President Obama designated 23 new monuments, along with expanding upon the largest marine monuments in the world established by President Bush. Controversies over establishment reached a serious level during the Obama administration, as Congress had attempted to restrict presidential authority with bills. There are many reasons for expanding and creating these monuments, as protected areas aim to maintain the benefits provided by natural ecosystems. Today, these areas also deliver a wide range of social and economic benefit. The cost of protection is low by comparison to its value, as it has been estimated that the cost of buying all of the world's biodiversity hotspots is around $100 billion, or the equivalent of less than 5 years' expenditure on soft drinks in the United States. As of 2000, the world spent only around $6.5 billion annually on management of protected areas. Proper protection on 15% of total land area instead of current protection on 11% would require between $20 and $28 billion annually. Research shows adverse effects from biodiversity loss as economic inequality persists in these areas, and the benefits of protection likely far outweigh the costs. In April of 2017, President Trump ordered Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to review 27 national monuments created or expanded since the Clinton administration in 1996. Zinke was directed to assess the boundaries and management standards while also considering local economic development impacts. In a leaked memo, Zinke recommended shrinking 4 monuments and changing standards in 6 others to allow more timber harvesting, grazing, fishing, and road access. This review was influenced by complaints from Utah politicians who were elected because the state felt slighted by Clinton's decision to protect 1.7 million acres as Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, and critics contended that its creation blocked a large coal mine project. Also, the marine protected areas which have been expanded have been opposed because they have limited fishermen's access. Zinke also recommended allowing commercial fishing within certain national monuments. A few months later, Trump sharply reduced the size of Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah by some 2 million acres, the largest rollback of federal land protection in the nation's history. The administration shrank Bears Ears by 85% and Grand Staircase Escalante by about half. Environmentalists and Native nations say the decision will destroy heritage and threaten some 100,000 sites of importance within the landscapes. Obama set boundaries of Bears Ears to include 1.35 million acres, which was said to be the minimum required to protect these artifacts. The proclamation by Trump shrinks this to just over 200,000 acres. Trump explains, saying that some of the places are, quote, not unique to the monument or are, quote, not of significant scientific or historic interest. Within a month of this restriction, 10 of 12 NPS Advisory Board members resigned, leaving the government without a functioning body to designate historic or natural landmarks. The board, which was established in 1935, has included former elected officials from both parties, as well as social and natural science academics. The focus recently has been on addressing climate change and encouraging younger visitors to frequent the parks. The board is required to meet twice a year but hadn't in Trump's first year in office, and members were surprised to not be consulted on the recent verdict to increase fees, which has been positive, but also the reversal of a ban on plastic water bottles in the parks. The verdict to reverse climate change directives has caused resignation. Now it seems that pro-park agenda will probably not emerge, or at least that it won't involve any consulting from a board designed to do so. In a time of concern for park protection, proper protection strategies can be conceived in new ways thanks to modern technologies. David Theobald focuses on human modification in the United States by way of magnitude and footprint, denoted here with capital I and capital F. He scales this impact from 0.0 to 1.0 and found that the degree of modification was 0.3756 for the United States, with most in the Great Lakes region. Amongst other uses of this data, Theobald highlights perhaps the most important, in which modification maps can help provide locally relevant and meaningful measures that can be used to inform the selection of conservation targets and help prioritize these locations. This figure on the right highlights these areas in 4 separate gap layers. So after 144 years of expanding protection, what underlying political and socio-economic patterns explain current declines in protection in southeastern Utah? On the right is a GIF displaying the growth in NPS ownership lands in the period 1 between the creation of Yellowstone and the New Deal, period 2 up until the Wilderness Act, and period 3 being all of the protection following this act. Also, I have created an Excel table displaying these growth trends on a year-to-year basis with the same 3 periods emphasized. One potential reason for decline in Utah is the political affiliation of citizens within the counties statewide. Most of the state voted against Obama in the 2012 presidential election, so therefore it is easier to see why the opposition of the expansions exists. The protected lands of Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante are far geographically from any Democratic support, as the only moderate county is on the other side of the state. So generally it can be inferred that there is likely not much local opposition to Trump's restriction on solely political understanding of the state of Utah. As highlighted earlier, Zinke was considering local economic development impacts while assessing the 27 parks, including Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. According to the same 2012 presidential election data, the counties surrounding these protected areas were the least wealthy in median household income, and this appears on the surface to support the conservative argument that these areas were limiting job growth and economic-wide development in these southeastern counties. So, will these restrictions restore wealth to these counties? Returning to the earlier article about Zinke's proposals, Grand Staircase Escalante has been a national monument for 20 years, and nearby communities have experienced considerable income and job growth, suggesting that the monument is not a drag on the economy. In 1994, a major Atlantic fishing ground from Nova Scotia to southern New England was closed to protect plummeting fish stocks, and in 7 years, haddock populations increased fivefold, flounder by more than 800%, cod by about 50%, and scallops 14-fold. Closing monuments to industrial fishing, which Zinke is attempting to reverse, helps restore habitats and the species within. Furthermore, ocean warming and acidification from global climate change causes new demands for approaching park management. The ability to predict abundance of marine species will be affected in the coming years. Another article from U.S. News & World Report determines that conservation is better than coal for economies of the rural West. In a letter to Barack Obama just weeks before declaring Bears Ears a national monument, a group of more than 100 economists urged efforts to protect federal lands in the interest of the West's economic future. Additionally, according to a report by Headwater Economics, rural counties in 11 western states found that per capita income was $436 higher for every 10,000 acres of protected public land within their boundaries. This suggests that the state of Utah is an outlier, and because protection has not been significant for that long, more growth is yet to have been realized in tourism. To help answer the earlier question, will restrictions bring wealth? 61% of public land leased to oil and gas is not in protection as of 2016, showing that resource extraction itself is not efficient, and it will not provide a quick fix for the economies of southeastern Utah. The United States has a long, rich history of park preservation, with frequent expansions and updates since the establishment of the Antiquities Act in 1906. Trump's presidency is changing the course, with the largest rollback of federal land protection in history. The implications of impending legislation will be significant for the future of park protection in the United States. Properly interpreting updated information in GIS map layers may help us determine what should occur in a time of opinions that are more divisive than ever before.